The blood on her freshly laundered sheets made Elena's breath catch in her throat. She stood frozen in the doorway of her tiny attic room, her arms still clutching the stack of towels she'd carried up from the mansion's lower floors. The man sprawled across her narrow bed. Shouldn't have been there. No one should have been there. Her room was her sanctuary, the one place in the vast estate where she could escape the demanding voices of her employers, where she could finally breathe without feeling the weight of someone else's expectations pressing down on her shoulders. But now this stranger had invaded that sacred space, and he was bleeding all over everything she owned. Elena's first instinct was to scream. Her second was to run. She did neither. Instead, she found herself taking a cautious step forward, her eyes scanning the man's face. He was young, maybe 30 at most, with dark hair matted against his forehead and a jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. His expensive suit was torn and stained, the fabric speaking of wealth even in its ruined state. A gash across his shoulder continued to seep blood, and his breathing came in shallow, pained gasps. She should call the police. She should wake the Hendersons, the family she worked for. She should do anything except what she actually did, which was set down her towels and move closer to examine his wounds. "Please," the man whispered, his eyes fluttering open to reveal dark irises clouded with pain. "Don't call anyone." Elena's hands trembled as she pressed a towel against his shoulder. 23 years old, 5 feet 2 inches of nervous energy, and here she was playing nurse to a stranger who'd somehow broken into her room. Her mother would have called her foolish. Her father would have said she had too soft a heart. They were probably both right. "You need a hospital," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're hurt badly." "No hospitals." His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. "Please, they'll find me." Those 3 words, "they'll find me," should have sent her running. Instead, Elena found herself nodding, found herself gathering her meager first aid supplies, found herself carefully cutting away his shirt to better assess the damage. The wound looked like a knife had carved through his shoulder, deep, but thankfully not hitting anything vital. She'd learned basic first aid caring for her grandmother before she passed, never imagining she'd use those skills like this. For the next hour, Elena worked in silence, cleaning and bandaging the wound, with steady hands that betrayed none of the fear coursing through her veins. The stranger drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally murmuring words she couldn't quite make out. When she finally finished, she sat back on her heels, exhausted, and studied the man who'd invaded her life. "Why did you help me?" he asked, his voice stronger now, his eyes clearer. Elena considered the question. Why had she? She was a maid, invisible to most people, earning barely enough to send money home to her younger siblings while living in a room not much bigger than a closet. She had nothing to spare, least of all kindness to dangerous strangers. "Because everyone deserves help when they're hurting," she said simply. "No matter who they are." The man stared at her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering across his features. Then, to her surprise, his eyes glistened with moisture. "You don't know who I am." "No," Elena agreed. "Should I?" He laughed, a bitter sound that turned into a cough. "Most people in this city know my name. Most people would have let me bleed out rather than lift a finger to help." Elena pulled her worn blanket over him, tucking it around his shoulders with the same care she showed everything she did. "Then most people have forgotten what it means to be human." She expected him to leave once he was strong enough. Instead, he stayed hidden in her room for 3 days. Elena snuck him food from the kitchen, changed his bandages, and sat with him during her few breaks, sharing stories about her life, her family, her dreams of one day opening a small bakery. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. He told her his name was Marcus, though she suspected that wasn't true. He spoke carefully about his life, revealing little but listening much. On the 3rd evening, as Elena helped him sit up to eat the soup she'd smuggled upstairs, he finally broke his silence about who he really was. "My name is Marcus Valenti," he said, watching her face carefully. "Do you know that name?" Elena shook her head, ladling soup into a bowl. "Should I? I run most of the organized crime in this city," he said bluntly. "The Valenti family controls the ports, the unions, the gambling dens. People fear me. They should fear me. I've done terrible things to maintain my power. The spoon slipped from Elena's hand, clattering against the bowl. She'd been harboring a Mafia boss. The most feared man in the city had been sleeping in her bed, eating her food, listening to her ramble about her silly dreams. I should go, Marcus said, reading her shock as rejection. I've put you in enough danger. But Elena surprised them both by shaking her head. You're still hurt. And you're still human. Human? Marcus laughed harshly. I'm a monster. I've ordered deaths. I've destroyed families. I've built an empire on fear and blood. Then why are you crying? Elena asked softly. Marcus raised his hand to his face, surprised to find tears streaming down his cheeks. I don't remember the last time someone showed me kindness without wanting something in return. I don't remember the last time someone saw me as just a person. Elena sat beside him on the narrow bed, her small hand finding his. Maybe that's what you needed to remember. That underneath everything else, you're still just a person who can bleed and hurt and need help. That night, Marcus told her everything. About the family business he'd inherited at 20, about the violence he'd perpetuated to survive in a world that showed no mercy, about the loneliness of being feared by everyone around him. And Elena listened without judgment, offering only the same gentle compassion she'd shown from the beginning. When Marcus finally left a week later, fully healed and ready to face whatever consequences awaited him, he pressed an envelope into Elena's hands. For your bakery, he said. Consider it payment for the best nursing care I've ever received. Elena wanted to refuse, but when she opened the envelope later, she found enough money to make her dream a reality, along with a note that simply said, "Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human." 6 months later, Elena's bakery opened in a small storefront in a quiet neighborhood. She never saw Marcus again, but she noticed that no one ever bothered her shop, that the local street gang seemed to give her block a wide berth, that somehow she always felt protected without knowing why. She'd saved a wounded stranger once, offering nothing but kindness when the world had offered him only fear. And in doing so, she'd saved something in him too, a piece of humanity he'd thought lost forever. A reminder that redemption begins with a single act of grace. Sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest changes. Sometimes kindness is the most powerful weapon of all. And sometimes a young maid with nothing but a soft heart can transform the most feared man in the city into someone who remembers what it means to be truly human.